Since morning, I have been learning a lot about India's past situation. I earn my bread by writing about politics, but this is more fascinating than politics. My first question to uh, Mr. Jain, because let's first go to the global perspective. Given that we have across South Asia, uh, we have ambitious energy goals, especially in renewables. But given that, how do you think that interregional collaborations are going to help in achieving this goal? Particularly, you are working on certain projects, uh, vis-a-vis India, India's cooperation with neighbors, and perhaps reaching far away to UAE. So, considering these things, how do you see the roadmap for this? Not only energy efficiency, but energy collaborations among nations.
Thank you, Kaushik. Let me first start by saying that I don't see Raj and Anilesh over here, but I've been discussing, and Anilesh has been saying that his job is difficult, but I can assure you one thing, of all the people sitting over here, Mr. Narasimha's job is the most difficult, and I'll explain why in answer to your question very briefly. And I will also share a personal experience in answering your question. Almost 10 years back, I was in the desert area of Bhadla in Rajasthan and Charanka in Gujarat. I was lucky to be part of the design team of solar park over there. At that point of time, we had very few gigawatts of renewables in India. Today, we are the leaders in the world. Almost more than 150 gigawatt of renewables we have already installed, out of which predominantly a lot has come from Gujarat and Rajasthan. I believe more than 20 or 30 gigawatt. And we are all big fans of solar and wind. But as we know, solar and wind is an infirm power. The capacity factor is 15 to 19% because sun is for 4 to 5 hours a day, wind has come in the evening, which is a destabilizing force for the grid. And when you put 20 to 30 gigawatts at one location in Gujarat and Rajasthan, because there's desert over there, what challenges it creates for the grid, Mr. Narasimha will explain it to you when it comes to him. It's a nightmare. And we have 150 gigawatts of renewables, but how much storage we have, we are still catching up on storage. We are catching up fast, but storage is one area which is required to balance the grid. Now let's take off in the global scenario. We were also discussing that areas like Africa, where the solar intensity is one of the highest in the world, but when it comes to the solar installations or wind installations, less than 10% of the renewable installations are in Africa. So you see how difference is in terms of the potential and in terms of the installations. Similarly, within India also, as I mentioned, we are very much skewed on the solar, on the Gujarat and Rajasthan. So what options do we have? One, to scale up storage, which now we are doing. SECI and the Government of India is coming up with several gigawatts of storage projects. Number two, to make our internal grid very strong. Again, Mr. Narasimha has done an excellent job in keeping our grid strong. But imagine a day when you will have a cloud cover in the desert of Gujarat and Rajasthan. It happens rarely, but if it happens, and it does happen, several gigawatts of solar and wind will go down. Then it poses a risk to our grid system. Solution again is one is storage. The other solution is to evaluate, can we explore connecting our grid to the east or to the west? In the west, we can look forward to Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Oman, UAE. On the west, we can look at the Southeast Asia. The reason we look at the east and the west is there is a time difference between Indian time zone, the Middle East time zone, and the Europe time zone. Europe is 4 years behind us. So when the sun is shining here, Europe is just getting up. Can we explore transporting our peak power from India to Europe via Middle East? And when we are in the evening, when we have the peak power, can we look at importing power from Middle East to us? Whether it is feasible or not, the feasibility study is underway. About 3 years back, World Bank signed a MOU with the MNRE and International Solar Alliance, where we launched a feasibility study for what we call One Sun, One World, One Grid. It's an initiative launched by the Prime Minister about 3 to 4 years back when ISA was launched. Under this feasibility study and initiative, we are looking at several pilots of connecting India with East and West, also looking at India and Sri Lanka connections. So in a nutshell, what I'm saying is, with the renewable energy coming up so fast, we will have to think out of the box and look at solutions. Is connecting India with other continents and other countries, can it be a viable solution in addition to the storage, putting up in the areas where the RE is going very fast? Thank you.
As Mr. Jain rightly pointed out, Mr. Narasimhan has a really tough job, and the grid system in India, it has come a long way since probably, say, 2012 when we saw a breakdown. These things are a matter of past now. But recently you only said that the reliability of this grid is itself a very big challenge, and with new challenges coming up, and you have to anticipate future challenges, then only the grid can keep up with those things. So for our general understanding, if you could highlight at least 3 big challenges that you anticipate in next 5 to 10 years that the grid might face, because there is a question of integrating renewables to the traditional forms of energy.
Yeah, thank you, Kaushik. So first of all, thanks for having me here as a panelist. So coming to the question that you raised, the first thing that I would like to say is that we must take pride in the transmission system that we have built over the last 25 to 30 years. 5 lakh square kilometers of transmission lines, 220 kV and above. The robust framework which we have for transmission planning and execution. We have the central transmission utility and CA at the central level. We have the state transmission utility at the intra-state level. They are responsible for planning and execution of the system. And more important is that even in the execution part, tariff-based competitive bidding in interstate transmission, that has been a huge success. And we went about integrating all our grids much before there was any talk about wind and solar. 31st December 2013 was when we integrated all the 5 regional grids, into one synchronous system. And one synchronous system has its set of challenges, but I'm sure the practices which we have, the operating practices which we have, that would go a long way in ensuring that the grid continues to remain reliable. Coming to what, I'll just mention, about Amit Jain, he said about Rajasthan. One good thing how transmission has impacted each person is that some of our team members went to Bhadla in Rajasthan, and then when they were sitting in the guest house, it was a private guest house. There was a lot of private hotels, where they were staying. They found that the guest house owner and the caretaker, he had complete knowledge of what transmission investment decisions have been taken because he closely follows the CA website. He knows which transmission projects the National Committee on Transmission has approved, and he was very knowledgeable. He would almost look like a panelist like me, the way he was discussing, So that's the, how transmission has impacted even the common man out there in Rajasthan. Now coming to the challenges ahead, actually life was much simpler in the earlier days. We had all our fossil fuel reserves in the eastern and central part of the country. The demand was in the western and southern part of the country. So you knew very well that power would flow from east to west, and north to south, right? And if it was in the other direction, something was seriously wrong, But renewables has changed all that, Now we have all our wind and solar essentially in Rajasthan and Gujarat, as Amit just mentioned, Khavda and Bhadla, these are the two areas where we have, in the last 3 years, Rajasthan, suddenly we have 23 gigawatt of solar, which has come up in the last 3 years. Now that changes the power flow pattern drastically, And so much so that during the high solar hours, we have south to north flows, right? And during the non-solar hours, it would be the other way around. So the transmission system has to handle all these variations, and in the planning horizon, definitely we have been interacting with CA and other authorities. So at least they have started planning for 16 scenarios in a year, which you would have 9 to 16 scenarios. In the night time, you would have one set of load generation balance. In the daytime with high solar, you would have another set. So it's important that we study that the network is reliable enough to handle all these scenarios. That's the first challenge, but definitely in the planning horizon, we cannot foresee all the possible scenarios, and we might end up having surprises in the operating phase. So that's the first challenge, and even in the operating phase, it's up to us to anticipate so that even if there's a surprise, you're well prepared for it. So that's one. The second is, of course, reliability doesn't come from wires alone. Lot many things go to ensuring that the grid remains reliable. We did have a lot of incidents of large solar parks going out because of a fault in the transmission system. So how this equipment, wind and solar, the power electronic devices, how they behave for a fault in the grid, that becomes very important. And it's important that the grid remains stable even under those conditions. So that's where, the CA technical standards, they become very important, and we have tried to put in place a robust mechanism for ensuring that when a wind and solar park, when they first get connected to the grid, we run all the simulations to see whether they would comply with the CA standards, but again, it's a simulation, and simulation and real life, there are differences, so that, so the incidents which we had, they were essentially that while in the first time when the asset got connected, things were all okay as per simulations, but in real time, there were surprises. Then we had to interact with each and every developer to see what are the settings, that changes that need to be made. And for renewables, it's very a different ball game altogether. It's a huge logistic nightmare. If you have to make any changes at the field level, they're all spread out. All your inverters, they're spread out throughout the countryside. And that's where remote changes are done, through VPN and others. So that's where the cyber security concerns, they also become very important. And third, of course, while a lot has been talked about in the interstate transmission, the intrastate systems also need to be strengthened. From 1st October 23, we moved to the general network access regime that the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission has ushered in. Now, GNA, from a technical perspective, let's say a state like Madhya Pradesh, if they say that they have 5,000 megawatt general network access, what does it mean? That they can access this 5,000 megawatt from any part of the country. That would mean, anywhere, 360-degree, anywhere from Gujarat, from north, from east, or they can access, and there should be no constraint in the transmission network. Now, it raises a lot of challenges as far as the planning is concerned, and so now intrastate transmission system is the next thing which we need to step up and further ensure that there are no weaknesses. That's it.
Thank you. Mr. Jain, you mentioned briefly, you are working on certain projects that while we were discussing earlier. One is undersea project, proposed undersea project with Sri Lanka, and the other one is towards Middle East. So could you elaborate on those two and how it might change India's energy scenario?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we signed a MOU with MNRE and International Solar Alliance a couple of years back. under the One Sun, One World, One Grid initiative, under which the feasibility study is going on. The French utility EDF was selected, which is doing this study and evaluating options of connecting India with both with East and West. And I'll just build upon what Mr. Narasimha mentioned about the robustness of the Indian network and how is it able to absorb the renewables. And if I can give you one international experience of Europe. Europe is considered of many countries, but they have one grid, just like India, which they called NSOE. Around 42 TSOs, network operators, are connected in Europe. Complex, just like India. But I want to showcase how they have managed their grid so well, especially in context of the recent Ukraine-Russia war, which has put so much pressure on the gas and the grid systems. If you imagine Europe, in Spain, down you have a lot of sun. When it goes to UK, you have a lot of offshore wind. In Germany and France, you have a lot of nuclear. And then you have other spread over assets on fossil fuels. Because of the dispersedness of the resource across several countries, they are able to export and import power seamlessly within Europe, saving billions of dollars in power. They are spending on an average $2 billion in the grid strengthening, but the savings from this one grid is saving much more billions of dollars per year because of the interconnection. The point I'm making is, interconnection of grids require a thorough feasibility study, whether our grid codes are able to connect with the grid codes of the other countries. But these advanced studies need to be done, whether it is with Middle East or with Sri Lanka or with other countries, to evaluate the option. As Mr. Narasimha mentioned, 23 gigawatts in Rajasthan is not a joke. Even a desert or a state is generating, and it's going very fast. So when we are moving very fast in that direction, and rightly so, options of interconnecting with other countries need to be evaluated. Recently, Italy, Tunisia grid is being now evaluated in a very advanced stages. There are various power pools in Africa which are now transporting power in between. Similarly, there's a loose grid in ASEAN region. Pan-Asia Arab also has a grid interconnections. So I think these feasibility studies will come out with cost-benefit analysis. If India has to connect with Middle East, at what point, what's the cost required, undersea cable or over the land cable, what kind of capacity we are looking at. India to Middle East is about 3,000 kilometers. What is the depth of the ocean? What kind of technologies? So all these results will come out as part of the phase 2 study, which EDF is conducting, and which will actually give us some of the pilots of India interconnections with other parts of the world.
Thank you. Mr. Jain mentioned about this European grid. Not disputing that Indian grid is any less, but what we can replicate from that grid, because while we were discussing earlier about energy generation within India, the interstate cooperation creates a lot of problem. So I'm pretty sure in the grid management also that's an issue. So what we can probably replicate from that European example to iron out these differences within India and make it more efficient.
Yeah, actually, I would tend to disagree. Like I think we are doing much better than what continental Europe is doing because we have been following them very closely. Last week I was at SIGRE Paris. We interact with all the European operators also. See, Europe, for all these years, they've been just talking about one country being able to import or export 10% of its load, That's still at 10%. But if you look at states like India, where which each state of India is equivalent to one country of Europe, many states in India, they are able to import 30% of their requirements from outside the state. And like if you talk about northern region, this summer, they were importing 25% from outside, right, during the night hours when there's no solar. So our grid is much more robust and import capabilities are much higher. Europe only now in their 10-year network development plans, they've been talking about raising this 10% to 15% and all that, but we are much, much ahead. Having said that, of course, international interconnections, they are also welcome. In fact, the larger footprint that one has, it has a better ability to absorb wind and solar. But going forward, we'll have many new things like data centers, we'll have electric vehicles, as Mr. Gadkari was mentioning, and all that. So we want demand response from these assets also. Wind and solar also has to provide frequency and voltage control. So that's the next level of interaction, and we are already working on that with CEA.
Thank you. I had many more questions, but it's saying time is up. So we'll have to end it there, here. Thank you so much for being part of this panel. It was really fascinating. It was an honor having you here. Thank you.